Baroness Natalie Bennett joins us now, former leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. Natalie, very good to speak to you again. This was billed as a very big announcement today. The Labour Party says, well, there's some good things in it, but not enough. What's your view?
Well, I think Boris Johnson very much likes baking metaphors. So what we were hoping for, was a lovely sponge cake, beautifully risen, balanced, tasty. What we got was a half-baked flapjack, missing some of the key ingredients, with some other ingredients that definitely shouldn't be in there. And you look at it and just go, this really, 12 days before COP, it's not just disappointing for the UK, it's also really disappointing in terms of what the rest of the world's going to look to the chair of COP and saying, well, that really just doesn't add up. You're not delivering the kind of things we need to see UK leadership on.
What are our major European competitors doing that we're not? Because the governments say that we are actually leaders in a lot of the green technology, in renewables in this country. We don't use coal energy anymore, whereas Germany certainly does. Germany's deleted all of its nuclear. We've kind of missed the boat on nuclear. France relies on nuclear. Very different economies in some ways, but similar size in others. What do you think we can learn from them? What can they learn from us?
Well, I think just to take one really shining, in a literal sense, example, in Sweden a couple of months ago now, Volvo took the first delivery of steel made using hydrogen instead of coking coal to produce it. This is a real step forward to low emission steel. This was only an initial shipment, but they're actually looking at within full commercial production within a couple of years. And yet what we have in the UK is, we've gone nowhere on that. We're talking instead about carbon capture and storage, as Fiona said, an utterly unproven technology. And the sensible thing to do is not to spend a lot of money trying to burn carbon and then pour it back into the ground. Leave it in the ground, leave the coal in the hole, as the saying goes, is what we should be doing instead. And also, when we think about steel...
we are.
But we export about 4/5 of our scrap steel. Now, if we actually had renewable energy powered arc furnaces recycling that steel, something you could have half a dozen of them around the country, so, scattering the prosperity around the country, then we could actually be largely self-sufficient in steel using recycled steel, which also means you're reducing the kind of damage that's done using with mining, the environmental damage. And what you're also doing then is, setting up a situation where we're keeping the value in the country, the jobs in the country, and not exporting that steel to places where it's recycled in a very dirty kind of way.
Do you feel that people in this country over the last 10 years, say, have made a conscious effort to be more environmentally friendly? And do you think that actually makes much of a difference?
Well, I think in terms of individual behaviour and individual attitudes, people have done what they can. But, I'm not interested in individual behaviour, because what we need to do is change the system. That's the old saying, system change, not climate change. And what we can do by changing the system is making our lives much better. One of the things that Boris Johnson made lots of today was electric cars gliding silently around our streets. Well, electric car takes up just as much space on the road as a fossil fuel car does. If you look at so congestion is a real problem that makes people's lives a misery. If you look at the particulate pollution, the air pollution that comes from electric cars, from a fossil fuel car, about half of it comes from the tyres and the brakes. Electric cars still have tyres and brakes producing those emissions. What we're talking about is things that make our life...
Hang on a second. Are you seriously suggesting that effectively, therefore, cars should be abolished? I was rather proud of myself for ordering an electric car. If you had said to me 2 years ago, Iain, you will be ordering an electric car at the end of 21, I'd have laughed at you. And here I am doing that, thinking I'm doing the right thing, and now you're telling me that I'm a polluter.
Well, no, what I'm telling you is that, systematically, what I'd love you to have said is that you've joined a car club and you're only going to use that car when you really need to. But, what we need to do on our streets, and what we're talking about, so many of the climate actions that we can make will actually make people's lives better. We encourage walking and cycling. This is giving people the chance to get exercise, giving people the chance to relate to their neighbours, relate to each other, creating a different sort of society. And you were asking about where other continental European countries are leading. I've, for example, been into Ghent a couple of years ago, where they've actually essentially got cars essentially entirely out of the city centre. It's dominated by people walking and cycling around the city centre. Now, of course, you might say, well, for rural areas, and if you live out in a rural area or in a small town, that won't work. But, in Finland, I caught a bus into the middle of a national park. And actually, I just got off the bus, and 600 metres down the road, I saw this magnificent stag walking across the road. I got there on that bus that ran every half hour all day. Now, if you try and get into the middle of one of our national parks on public transport, it really takes an awful lot of planning, and you've got to adapt to what's likely to be a very unreliable, if it's there at all, bus service.
I was talking to someone from Extinction Rebellion the other day, somebody I've known for many years, and he'd written, you'll know him, Rupert Reed. He wrote an article in the Eastern Daily Press saying that he hopes COP26 fails. And I could not believe what I was reading from a Green activist hoping that conference fails. What would you say to him?
I would entirely disagree with that. I hope we get the best possible result that we can out of COP26, and it's crucial that we push for that. But what I would stress is that this is not an end point. COP is not right, it either succeeds or it fails, and then, not like what happened with Copenhagen, the conference in 2009, the COP conference, where after that people were really downhearted and really felt like it had failed for a couple of years. This is all part of an ongoing process. And if you take, for example, the government's promise today on electric cars, well, what we're seeing now is it's very clear that the motor industry, and indeed people like you, are leading with demand. No one's going to want to be the person who buys the last fossil fuel car. This is all going to move very fast. And once you start to retool the production lines. What we're seeing, and there was a really interesting study out from Demos recently, a very big national study, and said that what people in the UK want is a carbon tax. They want local government supporting coordinated public transport. They want to see less consumption of meat and dairy. They want a frequent flyer levy. They want to see less private car use. This is what people are saying. We have people leading, companies racing to catch up with them, and I'm afraid the government is still well behind.
Just finally, I don't know if you're aware of this experiment in Coventry, where the government is providing, through Coventry City Council, a £3,000 grant if you agree to ditch your car and instead either take public transport or indeed a taxi, which I think is a little bit odd, but there we go. Do you not think that there are other ways of persuading people to use public transport? I mean, make it free for 3 weeks, and maybe people who have never used a bus before will then see the advantage of bus travel. Wouldn't that be a better thing, rather than effectively subsidising middle-class families who ditch one of their two cars, and it doesn't really affect those that maybe it ought to be directed at?
Well, I entirely agree with you that we really need to talk about a just transition, and we have so many people struggling to put food on the table, keep a roof over their head, and green measures should be absolutely directed towards them. And I think Sheffield many years ago was heading towards free bus travel. It was 5 and 10p, and everyone still talks about it and says, gosh, wasn't there very little traffic back on the road back in those days? But I think what we want to do is trial lots of different things, see what works, and as Fiona was saying, the huge missing thing here after the tragic collapse of the Green Homes Grant, something that Philip Dunn, the Tory chair of the Environment Committee, was calling on the government to keep, is we still are not seeing something to tackle our incredibly poor quality of housing stock, which affects poor people, of course, vastly more than richer people, and doing something to give people warm, comfortable, affordable to heat homes, particularly when we're in the middle of a fossil fuel crisis that's caused by the problems with our gas supply in particular. That's where, if we're asked what's one of the missing ingredients, that's certainly one of the missing ingredients from today's recipe.
Natalie, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure we'll be talking to you over the next couple of weeks in the run-up to COP as well. Thank you. That's Baroness Natalie Bennett, former leader of the Green Party.